We have in our country today a unique situation. A situation that has not arisen here or anywhere else in the world. An election has been declared by the Elections Commission. Dates have been fixed. The necessary gazette notifications have been issued. The election should have taken place on the 9th of March. The Elections Commission gave the Supreme Court a solemn assurance that the election would be held on that day. Subsequently, filing a special motion before the Supreme Court, the Elections Commission explained that although they had given this assurance, they are unfortunately not in a position to comply with it because the necessary financial resources had not been made available to the Commission. Now, the dates for postal voting have also been fixed. That is from the 28th of March to the 31st of March. Then the election is now to take place on the 25th of April. But whether this will happen or not, nobody knows. We don't know. The people of this country do not know. It is all in the lap of the gods. There is total uncertainty surrounding this matter. The unique argument has been used for the first time anywhere in the world that an election cannot be held because of the unavailability of money. The government printer has said that 75% of the work connected with the printing of the ballot papers has been completed, but the rest of it cannot be done because of the lack of money. The Elections Commission has addressed the Secretary to the Finance Ministry, giving a detailed account of the sums that are required for specific purposes immediately and making an urgent appeal to Mr. Mahinda Siriwardena, the Secretary to the Treasury and the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance, to make these resources available without delay to allow the election to be held on the scheduled date. So far, there has been no response. The money has not been made available, has not been put at the disposal of the Elections Commission. It is in this situation that the Supreme Court made an interim order directing the Minister of Finance and the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance not to withhold the monies allocated by Parliament in the annual budget to the Elections Commission for the purpose of holding this election. So the court directed the Minister and the Secretary forthwith to put this money at the disposal of the Elections Commission. That has not happened. That is the sole reason for the prevailing uncertainty. In that context, all the parties comprising the opposition in the Sri Lankan Parliament have made a collective decision to embark on a course of action. If within 7 days the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance does not comply with the order of the Supreme Court, the entire opposition in unison will approach the Supreme Court with a request that appropriate action be taken to enforce the interim order of the Supreme Court. In other words, to deal with the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance on the footing that he is guilty of contempt of court. He has deliberately disregarded an order given by the Supreme Court. He had not complied with it. And the failure of compliance on his part has entailed the very serious consequence that the suffrage of the Sri Lankan people has been infringed by the inability to hold these elections. It is not usual for all the different groups in the opposition to come together on a matter. Naturally, there are divergences of opinion. But having regard to the gravity of this matter and the extreme danger of allowing this to be established as a precedent, the calamitous consequences that can flow from the entrenchment of such a precedent in our country, going far beyond the domain of local elections and extending well into the sphere of presidential elections, which are due to be held next year, and parliamentary elections, which can be held at any time. So having regard to the ramifications, the very disquieting implications of this precedent, the entire opposition has resolved that if the Finance Secretary does not act in compliance with the interim order of the Supreme Court within a stipulated period, 1 week is a very reasonable period. If it does not happen, then all of us, the entire opposition, will deferentially request the Supreme Court to take action against the Finance Secretary on the basis of a contempt of the Supreme Court. Now, what is very surprising is that the government has not been content to leave matters at that, preposterous as that is. They have gone further and they propose to bring 3 judges of the Supreme Court before the Privileges Committee of Parliament. This is outrageous. It is a contumacious onslaught on the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Parliament is now asking the Supreme Court to discontinue proceedings in respect of a matter which is lawfully and properly before the Supreme Court. Parliament has no right whatsoever, not the remotest semblance of a right, to intervene in this matter with regard to pending judicial proceedings. Parliament has its allotted role, so has the Supreme Court. And the line of demarcation is established very clearly by the Constitution of this country. Now, what is the basis of this action that is sought to be taken against the Supreme Court? Entirely fictitious, without any foundation whatsoever. It is argued that the order of the Supreme Court in some way encroaches upon the legitimate functions of Parliament. This is demonstrably not the case. What is the pith and substance of the order by the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court has directed the executive not to withhold from the Elections Commission the resources which have been specifically allocated by Parliament itself, nobody else, Parliament itself, in the Annual Appropriation Act for a specific purpose, that is to hold this election. So what is the court doing? The court is strengthening the will of Parliament, far from in any way diminishing Parliament's authority or derogating from it. The court is directing that the will of Parliament should be carried out and that the executive must, without any further delay, comply with the deliberate decision of Parliament in the exercise of its powers under Article 148 of the Constitution, which declares that Parliament is the sole custodian of public finance. So, the court is playing a supportive role, not an antagonistic role. That is why this entire exercise is lacking in any sound rationale. It is not that the court is interfering with the functions of Parliament, the boot is on the other foot. It is Parliament that is encroaching into the domain of the judiciary. It is a well-established principle, respected not only in Sri Lanka but throughout the civilized world, that when a court is hearing a case. In other words, when a matter is sub judice, Parliament does not comment on it. Parliament does not debate it. This is in order to preserve the very healthy and the sound distinction between legislative and judicial functions. These organs of Parliament must act in harmony. These are the pillars of the Constitution, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. So what is now sought to be done puts in jeopardy not the stature of individuals, but the prestige of a pivotal institution which lies at the root of the Constitution of Sri Lanka. This cannot be allowed to succeed because it will destroy constitutional values which we have held to be sacred over the decades. Consequently, we as the opposition will do everything in our power within a democratic framework to ensure the defeat of these very dangerous initiatives, which, if unchecked, which, if allowed to succeed, will spell the doom of the democratic way of life in our country. At midnight last night, all the local authorities in this country were dissolved, 339 of them. Municipal councils, town councils, Pradesh Sabhas, all of them were dissolved by operation of law because their period had expired. So the position today is that not one single member of a local authority elected by the votes of the people still exist. They've all gone home. So this aggravates the situation created with regard to the provincial councils, where for 4.5 years there has not been one elected member of a provincial council. Yesterday, a statement was made by the state minister in charge of this subject that there is no reason for concern, that the public will continue to be served equally well. The public will still be able to get their grievances, matters, problems attended to. That is not true. It is far from the truth. There is a world of difference between the needs, the requirements of the people being attended to by elected members who will have to come back to the voter to be elected next time round. Naturally, one would expect a sympathetic attitude, a desire to help, to cooperate. The attitude of an official, naturally, we are all human, would be entirely different. It makes no difference to him whether the needs of the voter are fulfilled or not. So the voter has the right to have his matters attended to by people that he or she has sent to these councils or bodies. It is that right that is now being violated. Now we know that at the 11th hour, a desperate attempt was made to explore all avenues for ensuring that the local bodies that existed would continue to function. That is just not possible. The state minister said that this matter would be referred to the Attorney General for his opinion. There is absolutely nothing that the Attorney General can do with regard to this matter because the law is crystal clear. Local authorities are elected for 4 years. There was a special law which enabled them to go on for a fifth year, but at the end of the 5th year, compulsorily they stand dissolved. They cannot function any longer. For a very good and compelling reason. The reason is that if they were to function beyond that time span, then that would constitute a direct contravention of the franchise of the people, the fundamental rights of our people. The people sent these members of these local bodies for a specific period. They can't continue to function in perpetuity or indefinitely. That is a cynical violation of the suffrage. Now, the ruling Sri Lanka Potujana Peramuna has as many as 3,436 members of these provincial councils, elected by the votes of the people 5 years ago. They are all at home today. They are functus. They cannot function any longer. They don't know, we don't know, the people don't know when the next elections would be held. A profoundly unsatisfactory situation from the perspective of basic democratic values. So I think that the Port Tour, the Sri Lanka Potujana Peramuna, had not only the duty but the capability to ensure that these 3,436 people had the right to contest elections, to offer themselves for another term of office, not only the SLPP members, but all the others. But that right is being denied to them. And the major casualty is not so much the elected members, but the public of this country, who now have nobody to turn to except officials representing the governor, because all these powers now vest in the governor. The governor is the representative of the president. So here you have an entirely unwarranted enlargement of the powers of the president, not only at the level of the central government, but now at the provincial council tier and also at the base of the pyramid, that is the local government institutions in our country. A totally unacceptable state of affairs which should come to an end as soon as possible. So what we have to say on behalf of the opposition is that we will do everything we can to safeguard the prestige of the judiciary, to ensure that there is no interference with the performance of judicial functions. We will protect the media. Next week there is a proposal to deal with one of the media channels. That is entirely unacceptable. A government in power must be able to face criticism. The answer to criticism is not to stifle criticism, to harass and to intimidate, and to bring the relevant media before parliamentary committees. That is not the hallmark of a vibrant democratic society. So we will therefore resist such efforts to the maximum extent we can, and we will indefatigably campaign for the holding of these local elections as early as possible in order to uphold the fundamental rights of the people of our country.